Hello all, welcome to the today's webinar. Today we'll be discussing about FSSC 22000 version 5. What are the main changes and what are the requirements that you need to implement and how to implement them. So this webinar would be around 45 minutes and we would have some time for question and answer sessions. You can put down your questions on the chat window and we will try to answer as many of your questions as possible. My name is Sujit Kumar Nair. I have worked in the food industry and the auditing field for the last 22 years. I had a lot of interaction with food sector clients and have been helping them to demonstrate compliance and in developing capabilities for them. Let's hope that today we would help you to understand the version 5 requirements in a much better fashion. I represent Lloyd's Register. Lloyd's Register, we started out in 1760 as a marine classification society. Today, we are one of the world's leading providers for professional services for engineering and technology, improving safety and increasing the performance of critical infrastructures for clients in over 120 countries worldwide. The profits we generate fund the Lloyd's Register Foundation, a charity which supports engineering related research, education, and public engagement around everything we do. All of this helps us stand by the purpose that drives us every single day, that is, working together for a safer world. We are helping businesses evolve by connecting them with tomorrow's thinking today. Some of our key clients globally that we are working currently with, and these are some of them. There are many more with whom we are working. So coming to today's agenda, we would have three topics. One is why the version change happened, what are the reasons behind them. We'll discuss about the key changes to the FSSC 22000 version 5, and we'll also discuss about the steps to transition. So let's start with the why the version change. So there are many factors which has influenced the development of this new version. That was the first one is because of the publication of the new ISO 22000-2018 standard on 19 June 2018. There is a transition period of 3 years for transition to the new ISO 22000-2018 standard as determined by the International Accreditation Forum, IAF, and that date is 19 June 2021. So all ISO 22000-2005 certificates has to transition to the ISO 22000-2018 by 19 June 2021. The version change also will help to enable an integrated management system audits for FSSC 22000 quality. So now, because of the high level structure of ISO 22000 standard, integrated management systems can be implemented and planned for the organizations who are having integrated management systems. Also, this has helped in the improvement of the previous scheme requirements. This also is in line with the benchmarking requirements for Global Food Safety Initiative, GFSI, and also in compliance with relevant accreditation body requirements. So primarily European accreditation requirements. So that version change is now in compliance to the accreditation body requirements as well. So now the document which is published is one single document with 6 parts of it. Part 1 is the scheme overview. The part 2 is the requirements for organizations to be audited. Part 3 is about requirements for certification process. Part 4 is requirements for certification bodies. Part 5 is for requirements for accreditation bodies. Part 6 is about requirements for training organizations. We During this webinar, we would be discussing about part 1, 2, and 3, which is relevant to the organizations who are implementing FSSC 22000. Uh, Part 4, 5, and 6 is not directly relevant to organizations implementing FSSC 22000. So we would not be covering the changes in those. Apart from this six part, there are two appendix to the document. Appendix 1 is about definitions, and appendix 2 is about references. And FSSC also has published 7 annexures, and these annexures are mandatory and necessary for proper implementation of the scheme. Annex 1 is about the certificate scope statements. Annex 2 is about the audit report template. Annex 3 is about audit report template for FSSC 22000 quality. Annex 4 is about CB certificate templates. Annex 5 is about AB accreditation certification scopes. And Annex 6 and 7 is about training organizations. So we would be also discussing in this webinar only about Annex 1, which is the certificate scope statements. Okay, so let us go through the key changes that has happened in FSSC 22000 version 5. So we'll be discussing the key changes in the following requirements only during this webinar, because this is relevant to the organizations who are implementing FSSC 22000. So we will be discussing about what are the changes in part 1, which is the scheme overview. We'll be also discussing what are the changes in the requirements for organizations to be audited, and we'll also discuss about the changes in requirements for the certification process. So let's start with the part 1 scheme overview. Part 1 scheme overview, there is a lot of clarity on the subcategory of the food sectors, and there is examples being provided in the scope statement. So what type of scope would come under which category of the food industry has been clearly identified. For example, if it is C1, that is processing of perishable animal products, that would include slaughtering, deboning, evisceration, gutting, cutting, sorting, washing, pasteurization, trimming, curing, fermentation, smoking, freezing, chilling, cooling, scalding. So these are the examples of activities included in the scope, and they have also given the examples of product. For example, what are the products which can come under C1? These are fish, meat, poultry, eggs, frozen and chilled dairy products, and fish, seafood products. So there's much better clarity on the scopes in the scheme overview, and this scope has been moved from part 2 from the previous version into part 1, that is in the scheme overview. So that's a new change. Now, along with this, there is an annexure 1 which we discussed, that is about the CB certificate scope statements. So this annexure describes the rules for the scope statements on the FSSC 22000 certificate. There are general rules for all categories and specific rules for individual categories, which includes some examples which is provided in this annexure. So the certificate scope statement shall be within the scope of the scheme. There are certain sectors which are approved in FSSC 22000. So the scope should be within the scope of that scheme. The scope should be clearly and unambiguously describing the processes, activities, product types, or services that are supplied by the certified organization. The scope should not include any promotional statements or claims. Claims being any message or representation which is not mandatory under legislation and which suggests that the food or service has particular characteristics. Some examples are like health claims, nutritional claims, origin claims, free from claims. Free from claims means allergen free claims, organic claims, quality claims. If an organization makes such claims, this would be audited as part of the FSMS audit, but this would not appear on the scope statement in the FSSC 22000 certificates. Brand names are not allowed as this might suggest product certification. Uh, the scope statement should be in English, but other language can be added along with the English scope. It should not mention any subcontracted or outsourced processes within which is outside the organization's legal responsibility. And the scope statement shall not include activities like trading, broking, etc. Also, the scope statement should not include any reference to products, processes, or services related to non-food feed. So, for example, if it is related to pharmaceutical or self-medication products, tobacco, cosmetics, household or personal care products, or ink, this would not be a part of the scope statement. The scope statement should also not contain any exclusion for activities, processes, products, or services when those activities, processes, products, or services can have an influence on the food safety of the end products. Wherever permitted exclusions are applied, this should be mentioned on the report as well as on the certificates. Also, the scope statement should not contain any development and design as a separate activity. These activities are only allowed when it is a part of the processing or manufacturing activity covered by the FSSC 22000 scope of certification, and it should be part of the same legal entity. So there is a lot of clarity on the scopes, as well as they have described for each categories how the scope should be worded and with examples. So when we talk about the scopes for separate categories, so for category A, which is farming of animals, the scope statement shall contain the type of animal concerned. So it should be clearly mentioning what type of animals are involved in the scope of certification. If it is food chain category E, which is catering, this applies when the catering service is delivered directly to consumers. The food is prepared at the place of consumption or at a satellite unit. The examples are production units, kitchen that serve food directly to the consumer or offer food for immediate consumption. For example, restaurants, hotels, cafeterias. The other example is the catering handling foods at remote site with direct serving to consumers like canteens, coffee shops, food trucks, event catering. However, if you are supplying to, let's say, a airline, so let's say production of food for flight catering, including cold dishes, decorated cakes. In this case, the consumer is being served by the airline. So airline is the caterer. So for this scope, it would come under food manufacturing category C, not under catering. So this is a fine change. Earlier, airline catering used to be under category E. Now this would come under food manufacturing cat C. Coming to category I, food packaging manufacturing, the scope should include the type of materials like plastics, paper and board, metal, glass, should be mentioned in the certificate scope statement. And also there should be a text which says that intended for use in the food or feed industry on the scope statement. Now coming to food chain category, food manufacturing. So since FSSC 22000 is a management system certification and not a product certification, therefore listing all individual products on the scope should be avoided. So all products need not be listed. The product groups can be listed onto the scope statement. The applied technologies that can impact food safety shall be mentioned, like sterilization, pasteurization, fermentation, dry. But it is strongly advised not to put all individual process steps in the scope. For example, receiving, storing, mixing, packaging, storage, these are not preferred onto the scope statement. Unless and until that process impacts the food safety, then only it needs to be mentioned. The type of packaging shall be mentioned when it has a vital function in food safety. For example, vacuum packaging or modified atmospheric packaging, or when there is a potential impact on food safety. For example, glass packaging. When the products are intended for specific vulnerable consumer groups, this shall be included in the scope statement. For example, food for babies or food for hospitals, etc., can be mentioned onto the scope statement. Storage, warehousing, and distribution, delivery, supply, and dispatch operation may only be added to the manufacturing scope statement in cases these are dedicated to the company's own production, included within the audited food safety management system. It is part of the same legal entity. Uh, if you are using a third party logistics services, then category G is applicable, category C would not be applicable. The word sales is not allowed onto the scope. A manufacturer will have always have sales activities, and there is no specific reason for sales onto the scope statement. If byproducts for animal feeds is produced, it can be included, but this needs to be mentioned in the scope statement as for use in the feed industry or equivalent wording. Now coming to animal feed production, which is category D. So all requirements for food manufacturing would apply. Along with that, the type of pet food shall be mentioned. For example, whether it's a dry, wet, or a treat. Also, the target animal group shall be mentioned. For example, whether the animal feed is for cattle, chicken, dogs, cats, pet, birds, etc. For category F1, which is retail and wholesale, so category F1, it is a distribution category for retail wholesale, and manufacturing processes are not included in the category F1. But if there is some in-shop activities which is serving the pre-prepared food with the final process steps, for example, grilling, bake off, cutting, then this can be mentioned in the scope statement. Category F is a distribution scope, but this does not include transportation. In many languages, distribution also includes transportation, but in case of FSSC 22000, transportation comes under a different category. It is also required to specify which type of activity is conducted, whether it is wholesale or retail. If a company is doing along with a shop, they are also doing internet sales, or if they are delivering home delivery, then it is included in the scope. But if it is a standalone internet sales or a standalone home delivery, then that is not coming under the scope of retail and wholesale, and it is not allowed within the scope of FSSC 22000. Now coming to category K, which is production of additives, biochemicals. Um, the scope statement should make a reference that these products are to be used in the food or feed industry. So any chemicals or any biochemicals or any additives, flavors, colors, FSSC 22000 is only applicable if it is used in the food or feed industry. So the scope statement also should reflect that. Coming to category G, which is transport and storage services, the scope statement in category G shall, as a minimum, contain following elements: that what is the type of service provider, whether it is transport, storage, or cross docking. What type of products are being handled, whether it is food, packaging material, or animal feed. What is the condition of the activity, whether it is ambient, chilled, frozen, when the food or feed is stored. And if it is transport, then the means of transport like road, air, water, railway, bulk containers, etc., needs to be mentioned. So one of the key changes here is about the scope statements and how it should reflect onto the certificates of FSSC 22000. So maybe you can expect some modification to your scope statements from your certificate if it does not meet the requirements of FSSC version 5. Now coming to the other key changes is from part 2, which is requirements for organization to be audited. So the major change of FSSC 22000 version 5 is the introduction of ISO 22000 2018 instead of ISO 22000 2005. So all organizations need to implement ISO 22000 2018. And if I could discuss, there are four major changes or four major requirements for ISO 22000 2018. One of it is the high level structure, which is applicable for all management system standards. This is implemented in order to make life easier for businesses using more than one management system standards. So the new version of this ISO 22000 follows the same structure as all other ISO management system standards. For example, ISO 9001 2015, ISO 14001, or um, ISO 45001. The new structure gives a framework that makes it easier to businesses for integrate more than one management system standards at a given time. So a truly integrated management system can be implemented along with all other management systems when you have the new version of ISO 22000. All management system standards use consistent structure, common text, terminology, so it is easy to use, and they are compatible with each other. And this high level structure has identical clauses, identical subclause titles, identical text, and common terms and core definitions. So it becomes easier for organization to integrate their management systems into one system. The second key requirement, which is about the risk-based approach, there are two levels of risk-based approach in ISO 22000 standard. One is at the strategic level, and second is at the operational level. The standard includes different approach to understanding risk. The standard is providing users with a new understanding of different risk-based approaches. So the first risk is about the importance of food businesses to distinguish between hazard assessment at the operational level, which is the HACCP, and the business risk where opportunities also form part of this concept of risk. This risk-based approach also provides a new understanding on the concept of risk, uh, giving differentiation between the risk at the operational level and the strategic level of a management system. So risk-based approach, wherein one is at the business risk and second is at the operational risk, wherein you would conduct an hazard assessment and establish control measures to mitigate the food safety hazards. The third change in here is about the process approach. Process approach, also there are two separate PDCA cycle within ISO 22000 standard 2018. One is at the organizational level and second is at the operational level. The plan, do, check, act cycle, one talks about the overall planning of FSMS, implementation of FSMS, verification and improvement of FSMS. Second, PDCA cycle works within the HACCP, wherein the planning of the hazard, implementing the control measures, verifying the control measures, and taking improvement actions for the HACCP. So that is the two separate levels of process approach, one at the organizational level and second at the operational level. And the fourth key change on ISO 22000 2018 is on the operation process. So the operation process, there are improvements to the definitions on CCPs, OPRPs, and PRPs, and there is a lot of alignment with the Codex Alimentarius definitions. There is a clear description given on the differences between key terms on critical control points, operational prerequisite programs, and prerequisite programs. ISO 22000 2018 includes improvement to definition, and these now align with the Codex Alimentarius definitions also. So that is about ISO 22000 2018, and this is the most important change in the FSSC 22000 version 5. Now, coming to the additional requirements, there are some changes in the additional requirement of FSSC. Uh, so the first change is about management of services. So in management of services, this has been shortened. So the few requirements have been removed from management of services, because this is now part of ISO 22018 clause 7.1.6. uh, so only management of external laboratory services, it remains an additional FSSC requirement. Apart from that, the other requirements related to management of services has been removed from the management of services. Coming to management of allergens, earlier it was applicable to only three food categories, C, I, and K. Now it has been extended to C, E, F1, G, I, and K. So three more categories added. E is catering, F1 is retail and wholesale, and G is transport and storage. Okay. Uh, then there was a requirement related to management of natural resources. This has been removed. This was applicable to farming category. Now it has been removed. And there is one introduction of a new requirement which is related to transport and delivery, which is for category F1. So overall, if you look at, there is not much change apart from that management of allergen is extended to new sectors. Management of services, now it only includes the management of external laboratory analysis, and a new requirement related to transport and delivery. Okay. Okay, so now let's move on to the changes towards the part 3 document. So part 3 document talks about the communication obligation for certified organizations to the certification body within 3 working days related to the following. So any significant changes that impact the compliance with the FSSC scheme should be informed or communicated to the certification body. And if in case there is a doubt, you should get in touch with your certification body to understand whether it is a uh, significant change. Serious events that impact FSMS or FSQMS legality and or integrity of the certification, which includes legal proceedings, prosecutions, situation which may pose major threats to food safety, quality, or certification integrity as a result of any natural or man-made disasters, which can be war, strike, terrorism, crime, flood, earthquake, malicious computer hacking, etc. The third can be the public food safety events such as food public recalls, calamities, food safety outbreaks, etc. The other can be the changes to the organization's name, contact addresses, and site details. Okay. Uh, Changes to the management system scope of operations. Any other changes that renders the information on the certificate inaccurate. Okay. So that is about the communication process. Then coming to the next change in part 3 is about unannounced audits. So there are some changes in the unannounced audit process. The first is there is no change that at least one surveillance visit is unannounced. This was there in the earlier version also, that remains. The second requirement is about that organization can opt for all surveillance visit as unannounced. This is a voluntary when once an organization decides that they want all surveillance visit as unannounced, the certification body can conduct surveillance visits as unannounced. The new change here is that recertification audit may also be unannounced. This also is a voluntary requirement. So organization can choose whether they want their recertification audit also to be unannounced. Stage 1 and stage 2 cannot be unannounced. So this is a new requirement that you cannot. Earlier also you could not have stage 1 and stage 2 unannounced. Then unannounced typically has to be planned between 8 to 12 months from the previous audit, and the certification body would plan based on the blackout dates provided by the client. When during an unannounced audit, some of the areas within the audit plan cannot be audited because of the operation is not running, then there has to be an announced follow-up audit within the next 4 weeks. So during an unannounced audit, if a parts of the audit plan is not completely audited, then the certification body can plan a follow-up audit within the next 4 weeks to verify those areas. Okay. The next change in part 3 is about non-conformity handling. This was there in version 4.1 revision in January 2019, but we can go through them again. One is about the minor non-conformity. So there has to be a follow-up on minor non-conformity to review the corrective action plan and the evidence of correction within 3 months after the last day of the audit. Exceeding this time frame shall result into the suspension of the certificate. So this is again a new requirement which has come in, that if you are not able to complete the correction as well as submission of the corrective action plan within 3 months, this would lead to suspension of the certificate. The second is related to major non-conformity. There has to be a process wherein the corrective action plan has to be reviewed, and there has to be an on-site follow-up audit to verify the implementation of the corrective actions to close out the major non-conformity within 28 days of the last day of the audit. If major non-conformities are not closed within 28 days, the major non-conformity would be regraded as critical non-conformity. Critical non-conformity, there would be a separate audit conducted by the certification body between 6 weeks to 6 months after the regular audit to verify the effective implementation of the corrective actions. This audit would be a full on-site audit, and after the successful follow-up audit, the certificate and the current audit cycle will be restored, and the next audit shall take place as originally planned. So that is the requirements related to non-conformity handling. Few changes in the wordings, but overall this was there in version 4.1 as well. So let's have a poll question to understand what are the areas that you feel is important for you in implementing the version 5. Okay, so 51% of you are saying that you would require more information on the new standard, which is ISO 2018. Yeah, so yeah, that is the biggest change that has happened in version 5, and all organizations need to have a process in place to implement ISO 2018. Okay, so let's come to the last topic of our session, which is about the transition process. So, when will this start impacting you, and when are you going to be audited against version 5? We will discuss about that. So, the timeline for FSSC version 5. So, the version 5 was published in May 2019. Uh, the period from June to December 2019 is for certification bodies to get accredited. From 1st of January 2020, all FSSC 22000 audits would be basis version 5, FSSC 22000 version 5. And the deadline for changing over or the changing the certificate from FSSC 22000 4.1 would be till 29 till 19 June 2021. So uh, you have to implement the requirements in the next 4 months, and you should be ready for your regular FSSC 22000 audit, which will happen as a transition audit for changing over from version 4.1 to version 5. So the last day for FSSC 22000 version 4.1 audit is 31st December 2019. So after 31st December 2019, FSSC 22000 version 4.1 audits will not happen. All FSSC 22000 version 4.1 certificate will become invalid after 29 June 2021. So if there is a certificate already issued, that would become invalid after this date. Upgrade audits against FSSC 22000 version 5 should be completed between 1st January 2020 to 31st December 2020. So all transition audits or upgrade audit to the new version has to happen between 1st January 2020 to 31st December 2020. So I will show you the scenarios that can happen for your certification. So in 2019, if you have completed uh, surveillance visit second, which was unannounced, then 2020 you would have version 5 recertification. In 2019, you have completed recertification for version 4.1. Then in 2020, you would have version 5 surveillance 1 upgrade. If you had version 4.1 surveillance 1 announced visit, then version 5 S2 upgrade would happen in 2020. So this, and if it is version 4.1 S1 unannounced, then next audit would be version 5 S2 upgrade. So this is the scenario. So basis whatever you are, wherever you are in the certification cycle, the next audit would be a version 5 upgrade audit along with the regular audit that is going to happen for your certification cycle. So how Lloyd's Register can help you in getting through this transition process. So we have a process in place. We can conduct training for the key areas of change that are relevant to you. We can also conduct a gap analysis to look at where you are in terms of the FSSC version 5 requirements. So that is the starting point, training. Second is to conduct a gap analysis. Then a training for your top management for them to understand, because ISO 22000 2018 talks about leadership and involvement of leadership in the management system. So a training for them to understand the strategic requirement of FSSC version 5. And finally, in-house or public training for internal auditors, lead auditors, to have the knowledge and skills to implement the requirements of FSSC version 5. So that's the end of our webinar about the changes and how we can help you. Now I'm ready for your questions. You can send me your questions, and then I'll try to answer as many as possible. Okay, the one of the question is about explain major and critical non-conformities. Okay, so what is the difference between major and critical non-conformity? Okay, uh, a critical non-conformity is issued when there is a direct food safety impact without appropriate action by the organization uh, during the audit, or when legality or certificate integrity is at stake. So when there is a direct food safety impact and the organization has not taken appropriate action during an audit, or when legality or the certification integrity is at stake, then the critical nonconformity is raised. A major nonconformity is issued when the finding affects the capability of the management system to achieve the intended result. Okay. Next question is that next year all audit would be announced. Yeah. So all transition audits to version 5 would be announced audit. So 2020, there would not be any unannounced audits. Okay. The next question is about whether a critical non-conformity and FSSC 22000 version 5 audit will lead to an immediate suspension of certificate or not. Yes, a critical non-conformity would lead to the immediate suspension of the certificate, and the organization would get uh, up to 6 months time to take corrective action and go for a re-audit. And within 6 weeks to 6 months, from 6 weeks to 6 months, they can go for the re-audit, and after the re-audit, the suspension can be withdrawn basis the actions taken on the scope. Okay. Blast freezing operation can include scope of storage and distribution or not. Blast freezing operation is a processing operation, and it would come under the category C. And if it is blast freezing for fruits, it would be C2. If it is blast freezing of meat, it would be C1. Uh, in case of honey, can we mention natural honey on scope? Natural honey again is a claim, and ideally natural honey may not be recommended to be onto the scope of the certificate. When will the lead auditor course start for version 5? The next question is on the lead. So we are conducting a lead auditor course in Mumbai in September. So if any of you are wishing to attend this course, you can please register with Lloyd's Register Training. Do training organization or consultant need to be licensed to FSSC before they are offering that? Yes, training organizations need to be registered with FSSC if they are offering FSSC approved training courses. Lloyd's Register is a approved training organization with FSSC Foundation. So if you want to get authentic as well as approved training programs, you should always go through the approved training organizations. Uh, is it mandatory to take training of FSSC version 5? No, it is not mandatory. It is mandatory to implement the version 5 requirements. So If you are able to implement on your own by understanding the requirement, then it is not mandatory. But the people who are involved in the up, updation of FSSC 22000 version 5 should be aware of the change requirements. Okay, the next question is about please explain in detail the need for two separate PDCA cycles in the process approach. So one is the management system PDCA cycle, which talks about the overall food safety management system, the planning for the food safety management system, the implementation of the food safety management system, the verification of the FSMS, as well as the improvement. Now, the the second, which is at the operational level, is about the planning for identifying the hazards and establishing control measures, implementing the control measures like CCP and OPRPs at site, conducting the verification of OPRPs, CCPs, and PRPs, and implementing the improvement plan for the hazard control plan. So these are the two levels of PDCA cycles in ISO 22000-2018. Okay, the next question is about we are version 4.1 and recertified in 2018 with one announced surveillance visit. So what will we need to undergo in 2020? So if you are recertified in 2018, then 2019 you would have had a surveillance visit. So that would be your first surveillance visit, and 2020 would be your second surveillance visit, which would be a transition to or upgrade to version 5. Okay, the next question is we already have FSSC version 4 and the expiry is in 2021. We need to upgrade to version 5 next year or on renewal. No, all audits which will happen from 1st January 2020 would be basis version 5. So it has to be next year version 5. You cannot wait till certificate renewal for the version 5 audit. Okay, any example of written scope under category C, and is it necessary to include all the criteria mentioned in the slide just now? So if you go to the annexure 1 scope statement, there are examples given in the scope statement for category C. So you can go through it. Some examples, for example, production of X, uh, production and packaging of vegetable oil. These are the some of the examples which have been mentioned, and they have mentioned whether it is acceptable or not acceptable in the annexure 1 of CB certificate scope statements. Um, production, pressing, winterization, filtering, and filling of olive oil. For example, development and design of ready to eat meals. This is not allowed within the scope of category C. Production of non-alcoholic beverages packed in PET and the production of carbon dioxide as an ingredient for such beverages. These are some of the examples of the scope statement under category C. I would request you to refer to this annexure 1 document. You can go to the FSSC website and download these documents and look at that. Does internal audit training certificates need to be updated to version 5? The internal auditors need to be trained on the new requirements of version 5, and particularly to ISO 22000-2018. So certainly the internal auditors require a training on ISO 22000-2018 as well as FSSC version 5. Yeah, so there is a requirement for updating the knowledge of your internal auditors. Uh, as per version 5 requirement, is it mandatory the organization to be audit against ISO 22000-2018 new standard? Yeah, once the version 5 is applicable, it has to be the version 5 has to be as per ISO 22000-2018 new standard. cannot wait till the transition period for ISO 22000 2018. From 1st January onwards, this would be applicable to you. Uh, if there was an audit in next Jan 2020, this audit would be done on FSSC 22000 version 5 and ISO 22000 2018, or on version 5 and 22000 2005. No, if there is an audit in Jan 2020, it would be basis FSSC 22000 version 5, which includes ISO 22000 2018. Okay, there is a question about the lead auditor course for FSSC 22000 and ISO 22000 2018. You can refer to our website for the schedule of these trainings. Normally, this is done in 3 or 4 times in a year. We are conducting one program in Mumbai in the month of September 2019. So you can register yourself if you want to attend these trainings. How will the version 5 upgrade affects the CTA application in 2019 Q4? Okay. Yeah. So if there is a change to scope in 2019 Q4, then the next audit, whatever happens in 2020, would be basis version 5, and whatever happens in Q4 2019 would be basis version 4.1. Okay, the next question is about alcohol industry in which category? It is C4. Alcohol industry comes under C4 category in the scope statement. The training date, exact training dates, I am not aware. I would request you to log into our website and see the training dates which is there. Okay, do you have any more questions? Okay, so there is a question: can we put gluten free on fruit products like we put as trans fat? uh, the FSSC 22000 scope statement would uh, very specifically says that there cannot be any claims onto the certificate. It's this is something which has to be taken on case to case basis. Claims are not allowed to be put onto the scope statement. The next question is about context of the organization. Risk and opportunities are the requirement of ISO 22000. How to implement? Okay, so context of the organization. So this is in line with the requirement of high level structure of management system standard. So the organization need to identify the internal and external issues impacting them, and then identify the needs and expectation of the interested parties, and basis the internal and external issues and needs and expectations of interested parties. The organization need to identify the risk and opportunities from this context, and establish action plans to mitigate the risk, as well as uh, to to work on the opportunities that they have in place. Okay, the next question is about how does an unannounced audit work? So unannounced audit is once the audit is completed, previous audit is completed, the client is required to fill in a blackout date form. So they would provide the dates in which uh, they are not ready for the audit because the operation is not running. And once that blackout date is provided, the certification body would plan the audit between any days within 8 to 12 months of the previous audit date. And yes, the auditor would just show up in the morning at your gate, and you would have to be ready for the audit, for the unannounced audit. Okay, the question is whether we are providing IRC approved certificate. Yes, all our lead auditor trainings are IRC approved as well as FSSC approved. So the certificates would have both IRC approval as well as FSSC approval. Okay, there is one question that we are already certified on ISO 9001 2015 with different certification body. Do we still need to do interpretation, gap analysis, executive briefing, and internal audit? Yes. So what you have done was for ISO 9001 2015, which is related to quality management system. Now you still need to do the whole process again for ISO 22000, which is a food safety management system. So I think that is all that we can take today. Thank you so much for your questions. Whatever questions that we were not able to answer, we would get back to you with the answers by mails or some other communications. But certainly we would answer all your questions. So s- the summary of this is that much of your existing system will no doubt meet large parts of the new standard. So you will not be starting from zero, or you are not starting from scratch. You still have at least 4 months to complete this transition process from now onwards. So those organizations whose audits are due in January have 4 months. Those organizations whose audits are due in, let's say, next August has 12 months. And those organizations whose audits are due in December 2020 has 1.5 year to complete it. Uh, Remember, this is your food safety management system, and it needs to be designed to deliver benefits to your organization. So, whenever you are doing the transition, you need to focus that how is it improving your food safety and how is it improving your organization overall. And if you would like to have any additional help, such as gap audit against the new standard, on-site training of your existing auditors, or you want us to deliver a management briefing, you please get in touch with Lloyd's Registered Training. Once again, thank you all for attending this webinar. It has been a pleasure in conducting this webinar. I wish you all the very best. Thank you.